everyone at CQ World Stories with Felice, YO2 MGI. Today's edition is about being a young, passionate, professional, and successful amateur radio operator, and even more than this. And all these under one name, Max Friedman. November 4, Mike Lima from the United States of America, who at just 22 years old is already an old member of the global amateur radio community because he had started very early when he was just 12 years old. And due to his lifelong commitment to amateur radio, he took it very seriously, becoming very active in DXing and contests. And he already has joined some outstanding DXpeditions. He is also a director of the board of the Northern California DX Foundation. And professionally speaking, Max's vocation is also his avocation, working in the American Radio Relay League in the education department, where he develops resources to bring amateur radio into the classroom and in front of students. Well, when I first heard about Max, it was during the podcast I did with Adrian Ciupercă, Kilo Oscar 8, Sierra Charlie Alpha, before the Bouvet Island DXpedition from February 2026. And in that podcast, Adrian mentioned that Max was the youngest team member. And he also told us why Max was chosen for this fantastic human endeavor. And then I thought, okay, I'll wait until they return, and I would like to meet Max here on my podcast. So here we are. Hello, Max, and welcome to my podcast. How are you?
Hi. Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm doing great. Finally recovered from that expedition, I think.
I guess it took some time to fully recover from it because it was very challenging, isn't it?
Yeah, a lot more than you think. You kind of change your whole lifestyle, your sleep schedule, the amount of physical work you exert, and it takes a little bit just to get back into the swing of things back home.
I can guess. And we will get there while we talk about you, but because everything has a start. And I was really impressed when I saw that you have started so young at 12 years. Why did you start so young? What happened?
Yeah, so I was actually quite lucky. I went to a primary or a secondary school in the U.S. That had a bunch of extracurricular clubs and activities, and in fact, they gave us a day every other week just to focus on these extracurricular activities during the school day. And so you had to sign up for a list of things you would do. Some of them were further classwork, some of them were competitions. And so in the sixth grade, when I was 11, 12, they one of the options was this ham radio club thing, and it seemed interesting, and so I signed up. And then got introduced to a couple local amateur radio operators who were sort of the mentors for that hour and 30-minute block. And after that, it seemed interesting. They didn't scare me off or whatever. And they actually incentivized all of us. The first one to get their license out of this group of what we in the U.S. would call middle school students would get a free Yaesu handy talkie or HT. And, I'm a bit competitive by nature. And so I said, well, I have to be the first. And so I sat down and I studied for that technician exam and was the first and did get that Yaesu HT. And it led me to a deep involvement in school club amateur radio, doing things like the school club roundup amateur radio contest, becoming president of of my middle school and high school clubs. And doing things like an ISS contact with the astronauts that was a whole school-wide assembly, and everybody got
Yes.
to see our work get pulled off.
Did you really speak with one of those astronauts?
Yeah, we did. It was through a program called ARIS, or Amateur Radio on the International Space Station. Schools all around the world will apply for the valuable time of these astronauts. They're if you actually calculate the cost per hour it is to have those astronauts up there, we expended a lot of their time and well, a lot of NASA money. But yeah, it was real. It was a real astronaut, and we talked to him over a little. It was a Yaesu 897, and then a satellite antenna pair on the
What
roof of
did
our
you
school. Yeah.
can you remember the question that you asked, or
I actually
at
didn't.
least one of it?
So it's actually really neat. We farmed out all the questions to students in the amateur radio club and students in some of the science classes, and so there were like so long ago. I want to say it was like 15 or 20 kids all asked questions, but me as the president of the club, I helped handle the actual initial communication and sort of sign off in '73. So I don't even remember if I asked any of the questions, but I definitely did call NA1SS and all that good stuff.
A great experience. So, from what you tell and from what you sent me in your brief bio, I can say that you moved from a powerful experience to another and to another. And those 10 years since you started was very interesting to how things went for you. And I have seen that. You really started to get very deep into DX. And if you have the moment when you really started this and how it was like.
Yeah, yeah. So continuing on, I took a little bit of a not necessarily a break. Me and my I so contrary to a lot of young hams, I actually worked in the opposite direction. So I got licensed, and then my dad, his call sign is November 9 Bravo Foxtrot. He saw it and saw what I was doing and thought it was interesting, and then he got licensed. So I convinced him to get licensed, not the other way around, and so we always had a station at home, and sort of towards the end of high school, things get busy, you start thinking about college, and so I wasn't super active, from ages 16 to 18 or so. But then I go to university, and there's an engineering club that has the amateur radio call sign, and I say, well, why do they have the amateur radio call sign? And so I find out that they have this nice school station for HF and VHF. I get involved with them, becoming the trustee of their club call sign, Kilo 4 Uniform Alpha Hotel. And we did a lot of amateur radio balloon launches and amateur radio sort of as a platform. Um, but then, as you get older, I finally moved away from, either my parents' house or a dormitory or whatever. And so I finally had, me and my friends, we had like a whole house to
Wow.
ourselves with a backyard. And so,
Wow.
I had a 7300 and I put up a wire antenna and I was like, well, yeah, this is that amateur radio thing. And it was really, conditions were on the rise compared to when I got licensed. And so bands like 10 and 12 and 15 were a lot more usable. And thanks to, technology like FT8 and even just the better conditions, I did my DXCC, and that kind of got the spark back into sort of the HF side of the hobby. And so did that. We moved to another place, set up a better antenna. It was a vertical this time instead of a G5RV. And and then yeah, and then things just compounded from there. I saw all these people from all these places, and I was tracking all the DX news, trying to figure out how I can work. Like I remember probably the first DX expedition I remember specifically going out to try to work. Well, there's a couple. One of them was Charlie Yankee 9 Charlie. That was St. Paul Island. And then the other one was A25R in Botswana, both very well run expeditions. And it kind of got me intrigued into the whole process of, well, it's not just, a single person going out and traveling to these
Sure.
places with
Sure.
a radio. It's these big team efforts. And being in Huntsville, Alabama, we have the big Huntsville Ham
Absolutely.
Fest and all that stuff.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Let's stay a little bit more to your the expeditions and the first one because it was just for the young generation somewhere in Curacao, if I'm not wrong. Okay, how did you
Yeah.
get there? It was last year. How did you get
Yes.
there?
Yeah, so it was last year, and my friend Otis, NP4 Jeep, probably says it best with everything in amateur radio, and that's you just have to say yes to amateur radio, and the hobby will say yes back to you and provide you opportunities you would have never thought about. And so, I was getting into this contesting thing, and I was starting to do pretty okay. I'd been to some stations in the US. And so I said, well, I want to go somewhere else maybe. And so, through some friends of friends and the amateur radio youth community, one of them said, well, I'm putting together a youth team to go to the Papa Juliet 2 Tango station for the CQ Worldwide contest. It'll be a DX location. We'll all have time to operate as the DX, as our own call sign. So like I was Papa Japan 2 stroke N4ML. And that opportunity was presented to me, and I just immediately said, "Yes, please." And so we engaged from there in fundraising efforts. We received a substantial grant from the Northern California DX Foundation and substantial support from individuals and clubs that made it such that for the 7 youth operators on our team, nobody had to pay anything out of pocket, which was very amazing, and I feel very lucky that was the case.
This is really, really significant to have such an opportunity, which comes as a gift. It's absolutely fantastic. And I don't know, probably if you will be so successful from now on, who knows how many times it will happen like that. Well, I think we should dive a little bit into the most important challenging that you had, because I believe, and from what you will tell us, we will understand much better coming from someone as young as you are, your presence into this Bouvet Island, the expedition, since you are the youngest human who has ever stepped on that piece of land.
That's what people
This,
keep telling me. Yeah.
yeah. First of all, this is your, I don't know, the most powerful privilege to be the youngest one. And after this first privilege, of course, it comes a list of other privileges working with such fantastic amateur radio people, and you being able to use your technical skills as a team member. I think it was a lot to live in just few days. What did you think when you were told that you were chosen to be part of this team?
I was surprised. So I guess for context for the listeners, the way it all came about was, in I had started working at ARRL in February of last year, so February 2025, and right around then, basically a month after I'd started working there, in an unrelated department, of course, in education. But Adrian had gone on the trip to Mount Athos, which had some interesting things happen to him on that trip. And so he made a trip down to HQ to show the DXCC desk all of his proofs and that, yes, he was there and he was allowed to be there and all this other stuff. And so he said, well, I'm here, I'm going to take a tour. And so that's where I met Adrian in person for the first time. Now, of course, everybody knows who Adrian is, all the places he's been. He's sort of a rock star of ham radio at this point. And so I say, well,
I
Adrian,
totally agree. I totally agree.
and so I say, Adrian, I'd love to go on a DXpedition someday. It's something that's sort of in my plans. And he says, yeah, if that's something you want to do, I think you should do it. He's definitely somebody who encourages other people to do things in the hobby. Fast forward a couple months, I see him in Visalia. So they run a big international DX convention out in California. And so I see him again there. He recognizes who I am, sort of, because we had met that first time, and so we're talking, at the hotel bar that one of the nights after the show, and I say, well, Adrian, I'm trying to plan a DXpedition. I have no idea what I'm doing, but I'm kind of trying to figure it all out. And he says, well, Max, you should really gain some experience, in some of these places, and we're looking for people for our DXpedition. And I say, yeah, sure. Where is it to? And he says, yeah, it's to Bouvet Island. And I say, but yeah, that'd be great if you'll have me on Bouvet. I don't have enough. I'm a working person. Early in my career, so I don't have necessarily the financial capital to contribute to an expedition like that immediately. And he says,
Sure.
no, 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 no. If this is something you want to do, and I think you'd be a good asset on the team, we'll find a way. And so a few months of back and forth after that, back and forth between me and Adrian, me and Caesar of V3LYC, another
Yes.
Romanian ham.
Yes.
He
Exactly.
he interviewed me and did all that stuff. they seem to think, I guess, that I would be an asset to the team, and that everything would line up. And then yeah, I get just a random email from Ken, the DXpedition leader, in like June or July, and he says, "Yes, Max, we'd love to have you on the team. Here's your invite." And I say, "Well, I guess I'm going now."
You said a very powerful word, and this is exactly the word that Adrian used when he told us about you, that you are an asset, which means a lot for a team of that dimension and for something so complicated that the expedition was. When I heard that you are so young, I thought it would be a very very powerful experience. But age seems not to be a big problem in this hobby, since most of us still act like teenagers, like big children. So, but
Yeah.
for real, how did you feel being among your team colleagues for a pretty long time? I can say.
Yeah, yeah. Well, with these DXpeditions, there's a lot of things that happen so that you're not meeting these people for the first time when you get stuck on a boat with each other. We did a couple of workshops, one of which I was lucky enough to be able to fit into my schedule and attend, in Oslo, Norway. These were 2 or 3 or 4 days, where we're just working on things, packing things. The workshop I was able to attend, we actually finished packing the container with the 4,000 kilograms of gear, and so I had met a lot of the people that would end up being on the expedition, meeting people like Ken and Caesar for the first time, meeting some of the other team members. So that was good. So I wasn't going in blind per se, right? And we obviously had tons of online meetings and email exchanges and all this other stuff. We also had another younger-ish guy on the team, Alex, DL2 Alpha Lima Yankee, who I believe is like 28 or 29. So we had a lot in common, just an age, and we also got licensed at similar at about the same time too, and so we had seen certain parts of the hobby and could remark about those sorts of things. And but no, they don't pick they don't pick names out of a hat for a DXpedition like Bouvet, and
Right,
so I was
right,
I
right,
felt involved. I
right.
felt like I owned some of the process and the failures
And
and the
also,
successes.
yeah,
Yeah.
and also entitled to be there with what you had to offer, because I believe they relied on your skills. And from what I understand from Adrian and from Caesar also, uh, each one of you had some specific tasks. Which were yours?
Yeah. Yeah. So leading up to the expedition, one of the tasks I had ownership on was our expedition manual, right? And so this is a big, PDF document that includes, everything, right? And includes all the team information, how to set up the computers, how to set up the antennas, all of it's in one document that you can reference. And so you can say, oh, go to page 60, to figure out how to set up the 18-meter spider pole or whatever it is. And so that was a great task for me, even though it's, these expedition manuals are always used, a lot more before the expedition than when you're actually on the island. That's just how these
Right,
things are. But it was a good
right.
exercise for me. And actually, Alex was the other person on that, because it really gave me a great understanding of sort of the scope of the project and everything that we had to do. And so what it meant is that on the island, I kind of had a feel for what all had to happen sort of across all the different things. And so on the island, I did a couple of things. Everybody, the rule of the game is everybody did everything, right? If something
Sure.
needed to get done, it got done. But as far as setup's concerned, Adrian, Caesar, and I were responsible for setting up all the stations, hooking up all the amplifiers and the radios and the logging computers and making sure that all worked. Similarly, when we went to go set up the Flex Auroras and the social tents, that was Adrian and I. Um, some of the ancillary tasks early on were with myself and Dennis, who was the lead on that. But actually, one of our support team members ended up having enough time that we were able to sort of let him, take the reins there. But yeah, I mean, and then basically anything that happened on the island, everybody that at least wanted to participate had the ability to do. And so, yeah, I set up antennas, I set up radios, I field generators, I field jerry cans from these big,
So
field drums.
you can say that the skills that you had before were less than the skills that you had after.
Exactly. Yeah.
Which is fantastic because you become a very complex person by engaging in something like this. But uh, before everything else, before all the technical skills, the human body should be very well adapted to such a harsh environment. How was it for you? And if you had that bad experience while being on the ship uh, to Bouvet?
Yeah. Yeah. So what you're alluding to, I actually am very lucky. I did not get seasick. I did not take any
Okay.
seasickness medications or anything of the sort. And I also seem to dodge a majority of the food issues that some people were having. So there was a group of us. It was me and maybe three or four other guys that just didn't seem to get seasick, or the seasickness medication seemed to work. And so for us, it was a great trip down. We would wake up, we would eat breakfast, get coffee, we'd walk around the ship, walk up to the bridge, get some work done, moving stuff or whatever it may be. But that was we were in the minority, a majority, if not half of the people on the ship were definitely seasick the whole time. And then on the island, I'll say that the team very well prepared us for what we needed to bring as far as gear. And so I was never cold, really. I mean, I was cold, obviously, but I was never, cold to the point that I thought I would be getting hypothermia or
Yes.
anything. My sleeping bag was adequately rated for the conditions, and so when I'd go to sleep for the night, I would actually have to take off some of the layers because I would be too warm otherwise. And
So
and
we
that's all
can say
thanks.
we can say that your metabolism is very balanced because you very quickly adapted to pretty harsh conditions on the ship, then on the pretty harsh conditions on the island. So bravo. Probably age is one of the reasons why you are, but I don't think it's something that happens to every person of your age. I think your body is a strong one.
Yeah, no, I think so. It's I mean, even just things like adapting to the time zones and the sleep schedules and things. I flew direct from the Newark, New Jersey airport to Cape Town. So that was a 16-hour flight where I went from UTC -4, or might have been -5 because it was before daylight savings time, to UTC like +2 or something like
Plus
that.
two,
So it was
yeah.
like, yeah, so it was like
So
seven
not no
hours of
jet
time.
lag, no jet lag.
7 hours of time change, and actually there's a funny story there. So I land, it's like a Wednesday night, and Alex, who's the other young guy, we go get dinner, after we get settled into our places and stuff, and he says, well, there's a hike we can do, go hike Table Mountain, which is this nice sort of peak that looks over Cape Town. And I say, yeah, thinking it'll be, a couple kilometers or something like that. I'm like, yeah, sure, sounds good. I was like, I might be a little groggy from, all the travel and things. Well, it turned out to be a 10-kilometer hike with, a very significant vertical elevation gain in the first quarter. So it was a lot of scrambling on rocks and things. But we did it, and, I felt fine. And yeah, and I was pretty well adapted. Um, so, so yeah, I think it's an age thing. And then it's also just, you kind of have to, lie to yourself, a little
Yeah,
bit. You have to
of
say,
course.
yeah, this is fine.
Well, anyway, having all these evaluations, assessments after something so important as you did, I think this should encourage you for new challenges even harder than these ones that you already had. I don't know if it exists something like that, but probably it does. And if it does, it seems like you fit very well into this kind of challenge.
Yeah, no, I don't know if there's anything harder than Bouvet. I would even say Peter 1, which is where a lot of that group is going next year, is a little bit
Yeah,
easier than
a
Bouvet.
little bit
There's
easier. Yeah,
yeah,
yeah.
the Antarctic is a little bit calmer. There's
Yes, yes,
the weather's a little bit better. So yeah,
yes.
harder than Bouvet. I think that's hard. You'd have to maybe go to somewhere politically difficult. Maybe P5 or Yankee Kilo or something. But no, you're right. And I think that's one of the powerful messages of a trip like Bouvet, and my attendance on it is, that yes, people that, where this was really it was my second de-expedition outside, operating outside of the country, but really truly my first de-expedition of the scale, right? Where you go, you camp, there's
Yeah.
a lot of QSOs in play, all this other stuff.
Mhm.
I did it. I was an asset, I provided
Yeah.
value
Yeah.
and it,
What was
and
what was the most challenging thing that you have experienced there? Because from what you say so far, it, it seems to be pretty easy for you.
yeah, well,
Wow.
what I'm not including is that you're wet the entire time you're there. There's no way to avoid it. You're always wet.
Yeah.
And of course you're wearing wool and waterproof things, but you're always wet. And you're wearing gloves. Your gloves are I don't know anybody on the team who had a dry pair of gloves at any point during the expedition. So your hands are always wet and it's cold water, it's near freezing and all this stuff. And then it's just the days are impalpably long. You wake up, you maybe get some breakfast or a coffee in, and then you may have to go operate for 4 or 6 hours, and then you finish operating and you think, okay, well, maybe I can take a break. Well, no, there's more antennas that need to get put up, or you need to refuel the generators, or to refuel the generators, well, you have to fill the jerry cans, which means you have to walk over to the fuel depot and you know -1 degrees Celsius temperatures with winds that are uh, you know 20 to 30 miles minimum. That's in miles per hour. So that's like 60 kilometers. Oftentimes much worse. We had a day where we had sustained winds of over 60 miles an hour.
Wow.
So that's for me, I'm not a big big strong guy, and so when that wind's blowing, it actually stops you from being able to walk, right, and it kind of
Right.
blows you in the other
Right.
direction.
Right.
So then yeah, okay, so you do all this, and everything takes longer than it should. You think, oh, I'm just gonna walk over and I'm gonna pump out some fuel and I'm gonna walk back. Well, think something that would take oh yeah, that's gonna take like 10 minutes. Well, it takes half an hour or 45 minutes, and then you're tired because you had woken up because you didn't get much sleep the last night because you had done this entire schedule again. But anyways, you get the generators fueled and maybe you have time to fit in a protein bar or maybe even a full second meal of the day. Really just depended. And then you have to do something like go to the restroom, which sounds easy, but no, you had to hike all the way up to where our toilet tent was, and then you had to kind of tactically, take off all your layers of gear to be able to actually use the
Yeah.
toilet, and
Yeah.
then it's all
Mm.
pack in, pack out, and so you have to take the bag and
So nothing is normal from what you
no.
describe. And in such an environment, I think anyone learns new things about himself or herself, who knows, but about himself for sure. What did you learn about yourself that you didn't know that you are? And what this experience mainly teach you?
Yeah, well, I think that sort of adaptive nature thing that you mentioned, I definitely learned and confirmed a lot on this trip. You know, um, I'd camped before, but never to this extent. Yeah, just the fact that even on the boat ride down to the trip, I was like, well, am I going to be able to work to live this life for 2 weeks and do all this stuff and then find a way to make QSOs. But yeah, I was able to, and I think something else I learned was how I work with other people in these sorts of environments. Which I think at the end I worked very well. There's a balance with all teams and sort of team management where how do you get something done? How many people do you put on a given project? When you're tasked with doing something, how do you figure out what your role is? Right? Everybody on the team, as you alluded to, are these star-studded hams that have been on plenty of expeditions and done plenty of other things. And so when you're me and you're put on a team to go do something like set up the radios, well, how do you figure out where you slot in? Are you going to be the guy that's directing all the people do all the stuff? Well, probably not. And so how do you figure out where you slot in to all these different projects? What was something I learned a lot, and I think for future stuff, even professionally, that'll be an asset to have to be able to
Right,
naturally
right,
find where I add the most
right.
value.
So you returned in glory. How did your friends reacted? How was it like when you returned? How did they receive you?
Yeah, no, I think most people were pretty amazed that at the end of the day we pulled it all off. Um, it's an unknown, right? Every expedition will say, we're gonna, and it sounds easy, right? Oh, we're gonna set up a boat, we're gonna, charter a boat, we're gonna take a helicopter offshore to the island and back, and we had internet the whole time, and so like to my parents and things, I was able to kind of say, hey, we're not dead, or nothing bad has happened.
Yeah,
And they had seen some of the interviews we had done on the island with like Tim Duffy of DX Engineering and Kevin of Q5, and so they knew that we had done stuff on the island. But until I got back, actually the day after I flew back, I was back at work, and I probably spent most of that day inside our main conference room with a photo album and just everybody at ARRL asking me various questions about the expedition. And yeah, I think for most of my friends and colleagues and other people, they were just amazed at how much actually goes into an expedition, and not only how much goes into it, but how much of what people talk about going into an expedition actually having to happen, you know?
yeah, yeah, yeah. Well, all the stuff, everything that happened there, and the way you put it in a very narrative way, really epic way. I think you should think about writing a book. Did you?
Yeah, yeah. Caesar's the book writer of our group of people. He's written. I actually have it. Sitting next to me, his big Iota the Expedition book. I think if I were going to write a book, I'd just want to do more stuff. There's only so much you can write about a single expedition, but one of these days, maybe when I have some more expeditions under my belt, maybe some expeditions I've led, you, you know, that then
Yeah,
I'd write like a Marty Lane style, where do we go next sort of
yeah,
publication going over all
yeah.
of these stories. But you're right. I definitely have taken a lot of time to write down a lot of the things from the
All right.
expedition just so I don't forget them, in 5 or 10 years.
Mainly because you are so young. So far, you are very young and you can inspire the new generations. And by the way, you really work with them, from what I understand. And let's talk a little bit about your activity in the ARRL. How did you get there? I understand that it's something that happened in 2025. How?
Yeah, so I had left school and I was working at a startup, doing some product management things, and I it was full time remote. It was great. And when I realized it was remote and like actually remote, so I didn't have to be inside the country to do the work or whatever, I said, well, let me go let me go. I'd never been to Europe at the time, and so I said, well, let me go to Europe. And so I went to Friedrichshafen, the big amateur radio conference, and in 2024, I went there and saw the show, which was it's an amazing ham radio convention. Very well put together, beautiful part of Germany to be in. And the ARL has a booth there. And so I was talking to some of those guys and I was like, yeah, it'd be great to, work in amateur radio and work there or whatever. I said, and you'll notice this is a common trend. I said, yeah, I think I could provide some real value to sort of furthering the efforts in the future of the organization. And so I had said that just sort of as an offhand comment, and I guess they had listened, and then so you'd fast forwarded, and then there's another Ham Fest actually in Huntsville where I lived, and I went there and talked a little bit more seriously with some of the staff there, some of the management and whatever, and then yeah, sort of towards the tail end of 24, I had an email that said, yeah, you should send me your resume. We have a couple of job positions open. Then I got a couple, did a couple phone call interviews, did like a couple, virtual interviews, and then went up there to do like in person stuff. And then yeah, they decided to offer me a job within the education department, which of course you have to say yes to. It's an honor to be able to work at
Absolutely.
work at the U.S. Amateur Radio Members Society, and yeah, and so that's kind of how I ended up there.
Which is beautiful. And if you are looking back when you started, um, I think you should consider yourself not just lucky, but somehow aligned with your professional destiny. because definitely you put your right foot on the ground when you have started this hobby, which turned to be a professional career. And your opportunity to work with the young generation is even more significant for someone like you. And this is the moment when I must ask you, how do you perceive them? Because you deliver exactly what should motivate them to follow someone like you. How big is the interest of the new generation for this passion?
Yeah, the new generation's doing a lot of neat stuff. They kind of have a lot of work against them. It's a lot harder to find, at least in the United States. It's a lot harder to find spaces to set up amateur radio antennas and things these days between these homeowners associations that say, no antennas. Your grass must be a certain length. All this sort of stuff. But they're very passionate. One of the programs I'm involved with is I'm a staff liaison for our collegiate amateur radio program. This is a program we run where every month, and then at conventions like Dayton and other ham fests, we get together with the collegiate community, all these college students and clubs, and we basically say, what are you guys doing, and what can we do to help? And they're doing a lot of neat stuff. They're setting up stations in their school. They're figuring out, they're doing, their own little DX marathons, inside the club where they're saying, from our school station, how many DX entities can all of the different club members work? Other youth outside of that, I think contesting is a big place where we're seeing a lot of great youth involvement. I think a lot of the youth, even myself included, kind of get into it under the guise of, well, I like playing video games, in my middle, in my high school days, and even into college, and even today, I like to play a lot of competitive games like Counter Strike and other things, and contesting has that same sort of competitive spirit. And so we're seeing a lot of these young guys and girls get into contesting that way. The youth overlay data for contests has grown. We're seeing more and more people under the age of 25 enter these contests. And so I'm very hopeful with the next generation, both at sort of my age, this 18 to 25, but also with the under 18s. One of the programs we run at ARL, one of my job focuses is the Teachers Institute on Wireless Technology. Basically a long time ago, not almost before I was born, some people at the ARL had posited the idea that, well, we could spend a lot of efforts and time and money to try to get like me or you, to go to a school, right? But there's a lot of blockers in place, right? To a school, I'm just like a random guy, right? They don't care what a Bouvet
Right,
is, or they don't care
right,
about any of this stuff.
right,
But when you can get a teacher, engaged in amateur radio, it's a lot easier to then get the students engaged, right? Because these students see
right,
this teacher for 5 days a week, oftentimes, 7, 8 hours a
right.
day. And so we've taken hundreds of teachers just in the past couple of years, hundreds of teachers that have impacted thousands, if not tens of thousands of students to get into the amateur radio hobby. And they're all interested and sort of graciously so, and a lot of the same stuff that like me and you are, right? They see this DXing thing and they get into it. And that leads to some fun opportunities like on Bouvet. Adrian and I actually talked to a couple of schools from Bouvet Island, and we were on a Zoom meeting because we had Starlink internet. And so I was able to show them the camp and all this other stuff. And they were very engaged and they asked good questions. And a lot of them
Definitely.
said, well, how can I do this?
Okay. And I think from what you describe, um, I believe you have started to think which will be my next group, my next team for my next D expeditions, and me as a leader of those teams. And I think you have enough human resource there to create wonderful teams for something big and something wonderful for all of you in the next coming years.
Yes, for sure. There's, as Adrian or Caesar will say, everybody's always making plans all the time. You only
Right.
hear about the ones that actually come
Right.
about. And so there's definitely some things in the works that you may hear about soon.
Yeah. Okay. At just 22 years old, you have one more dimension, that one of director on the board of the Northern California DX Foundation. How did you get there?
Yeah, so it's actually a really funny story. So, did Bouvet, came back from Bouvet at the end of March, and then sometime in like the first or second week of April, I get an email from Don Greenbaum, N1DG, who's the treasurer on the board of NCDXF. And Don, he has a background in financial markets and all this and banking and all these other things, and so he talks and emails like a banker. And so, worth mentioning, of course, here is I received a very large grant from the Northern California DX Foundation to enable me to go to Bouvet. They
All right.
100% covered my operator fee, which was a very big number. Um,
Yeah.
so it was a first for them as far as size, and it was a first for me in figuring out that that was possible. But anyways, I get an email from Don that just says, it just says, Max, can we talk this week? Don. I'm like, oh no, what did I do something wrong, or is there some issue, whatever? And I say, sure, Don, we can call this time. And so, he calls me, and it's him and then Kevin, who at the time, K6TD, who was the president of NCDXF, and they're calling and they're talking to me, and they say, well, we're thinking about adding a couple board slots, and moving it from 11 to 13 board members, and we'd like you to be on the board, if you're interested. And I said, well, if you guys think I can, execute the duties of the board member of the Northern California DX Foundation, and I think I can, I would be happy to serve on the board should you guys vote me on. And so, I send them, a ham radio resume that covers a lot of what we've talked about here, expeditions, other involvements, all that sort of stuff. And then I hear back from them with a vote that says yes. We've voted you, and then also my good friend Violetta KN2P, as the two new directors on the board of NCDXF, and it happened just as fast as that. Once again, it's one of those shocked and amazed moments. The board
Right.
of the Northern California DX Foundation
Right.
has
Right.
guys that have been on many expeditions, have had great professional success over their careers. Then you have a guy like me.
Right.
So
So it looks like the doors are very large open for you, and you are invited to just cross through it, which is amazing. You must have your lucky star, definitely, yes. And being so young, as you said before, everybody has plans. What's yours? What's next? Beyond your daily activities, what are you planning to do?
yeah, I really want to lead an expedition. I think you learn a lot. You learn a lot by being on a expedition, of course, but you learn even more by being that lead and being responsible for a lot of for the success and the failure. So I want to lead an expedition somewhere for sure, and then everybody has those entities on their strike list that they want to hit. Either as a team member or otherwise. I want to. There's a couple of entities. I want to go to. I want to try to make some of the impossible places happen. Um, there are a ton of entities on the most wanted list today that haven't been active since I've been licensed. Or if they have been active, they were active and then kind of shut down. And so
All right.
I kind of want to try to make the impossible happen as much as I can.
Since you already have the experience from Bouvet, it looks like impossible was really no longer impossible for you because you've been there. So I think the word impossible should be erased from your project because the impossible was Bouvet Island. So nothing else it's impossible.
Maybe so.
Well, yeah. Uh, do you plan or did they invite you to join the next expedition on Peter Island?
We've been talking, back and forth. I think it's sort of in my court. As an early career person, for Bouvet, I took off 41 days, which is a lot. And so to do it again 2 years in a row is a lot. So even though I'm sure they would be happy to have me, or happy to have me tag along, I just I just don't know if it's the right move. If I want to still have a house and pay rent and do all these things that you have to do, right?
Well, dear Max, I think this is just our first interview because with such an amazing agenda that follows, I will be very curious to know more about your expeditions and everything else. Of course, if you agree to have other editions together, and I see no reason why not. For today, I want to thank you for being here with us. I want to thank you for sharing your story with us. It was absolutely fascinating to listen and to understand from your energy that it happened like a thunderbolt. Everything, the way you have perceived and seen and lived everything is absolutely fascinating. And I'm very sure, as I said previously, that there will be other conversations in the months or years to come. From me, I wish you from the bottom of my heart to have great experiences, to have wonderful expeditions, and to have all your projects as successful as everything that already happened for the young generation. Yeah, let's see what the future brings.
Yeah, let's see. No, and thanks for having me. This was a lot of fun. Um,
Well, as long as it remains a funny experience, let's continue it this way. From me and from Hadrian, my husband, Yankee Oscar 2 Bravo Tango Whiskey, many thanks. And you will be welcome each time you feel like to continue to tell stories about Max. Okay, thank you, dear friends, for watching my podcast. I will continue to bring you other interesting stories from amateur radio people from all around the world. But keep in touch because who knows what's coming next. And until next time, I wish you, I wish you all take good care of you because it's so important to be in shape each and every day. And of course, take care of your radio stations and of your antennas. And I really appreciate your likes, your comments, and your shares and your subscribes. And as a final touch, as I do it every time, until next time, from me, 73.